Welcome to today's episode of Buildings Hub Live, where we spotlight the changemakers and technologies leading the charge to electrify our built environment. On our podcast, we tackle the issues facing building decarbonization, from space heating to water heaters to electric cooking and beyond. On this episode, we'll sit down with Karen Zelmar, Program Manager at the Department of Energy, to discuss all the ins and outs of the heavily anticipated Federal Home Energy Rebates program. Want to learn how the federal government can help you save money on appliance upgrades and efficiency improvements to your home? Stick with us because we're about to find out. Here's your host, Atlas Policy Analyst, Zach Strauss.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of Buildings Hub Live. My name is Zach Strauss, Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy, and I have the pleasure of being your host today. For today's episode, we'll break down the Federal Home Energy Rebate programs and discuss how everyday Americans, including everyone out there, can apply for federal funds to purchase new electric appliances and make efficiency upgrades to your homes. The Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, appropriated billions, with a B, to electrify buildings with a particular focus on low and middle income communities. This critical injection of funding will support efficiency gains for residential buildings across all demographics in this historic nationwide effort. What can we expect from these programs? What is required of states in the funding process, and how will funding be dispersed? How does the average consumer apply for and take advantage of these programs? And who qualifies? Well, stick with us today because we're all about to find out. Before we jump into our discussion, a quick note on Buildings Hub. Here at Atlas, we manage a one-stop shop data analysis tool for building sector electrification called Buildings Hub. If you're interested in heat pump market data, state policies and funding programs, U.S. housing data, federal funding opportunities like the one we're about to discuss today, we've got you covered, and a lot more. We just dropped a new data story focused on the road to Midwestern electrification with an eye on market data, public policy, and everything in between. Please register for our platform and check out that article and all of our data features today. We'd love to have you join the electrification community. We put a link here to the site below. Check it out. I think it's pretty rad. Now, for today's episode, like always, we are currently live on YouTube and LinkedIn, and we encourage our audience to send us over your questions, and we'll pull them in as we go along. You can do so through the Q&A portal on our YouTube channel. Now, it is my profound pleasure to introduce our special guest today. We are joined by none other than Karen Zelmar, Program Manager at the U.S. Department of Energy, who leads all of the work related to the home energy rebate programs at the department. A big welcome to Karen. Thank you so much for being here today on Buildings Hub Live.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you. And we got lots to cover. And like always, only half an hour. So we're going to get right into it. Excited to have this conversation with you. I wanted to start with a high level question and scene setter about your work at the Department of Energy or the DOE. What does your day-to-day entail? And what is your role in the building electrification space at the department?
Well, thanks for that question. I'm very excited to talk about the work that we're doing. So I am very new to the department. I'm 5 months in, and I come to you here from PG&E in California, and I have a lot of experience running programs like this. And what I'm finding about DOE that's been wonderful is there's a lot of similarities to the utility in that the people are very mission driven. They're working to accomplish meaningful change and understand that takes time and a lot of work and coordination. And what's new for me, being part of such a large federal initiative, is taking care to make sure the funds are managed responsibly with a focus on preventing waste and fraud, because that's something that is important to look out for. So my day-to-day really varies. I spend a lot of time with my small but very mighty team who are deep experts in the building electrification field, in efficiency, in running programs. And we are trying to respond to all of the different stakeholders who are engaged in these programs. First and foremost, that's the state energy offices that run these programs, but so many other parts of the ecosystem are participating as well. Program implementers, manufacturers, retailers, community groups. And so, for us, especially, once the guidance was released, and we can talk about that in a little bit, it's been great because we finally can kind of be working externally and having conversations and getting the word out. So in terms of the building electrification work at DOE, most of it is run by the Building Technologies Office, or the BTO. IRA programs are actually in a separate office, a new office at DOE called the State and Community Energy Programs Office. But we work really closely with the BTO team, and actually a few of the people on my team came from BTO and have moved over to help run this program. So I feel like we're in good shape with the expertise.
Awesome. Thanks for giving us your trajectory and why you're interested in this work. And I think this is a critical time for building electrification. These programs are so big. So we're going to talk about them. So let's start there. So you manage what I say are arguably the cornerstone energy efficiency and electrification programs in the entire Inflation Reduction Act, and perhaps the most significant effort ever developed by the U.S. federal government to achieve those goals. Can you give us the lowdown on what these home energy rebate programs are and how they work? And how might they differ from one another?
First of all, wow, no pressure in terms of the question.
A great opportunity.
and a huge opportunity that I'm proud to be a part of. So as you said, there are actually two programs. We often talk about them together, but each program is about $4.5 billion each of funds that are being pushed out into the marketplace, combined to be $9 billion. And the programs differ fairly notably. One of them is a whole home efficiency program. And that is, as the words describe, focused about whatever energy savings can be found in the home, as long as it gets to a certain percentage of savings, and that is bill savings to the customer, to be really clear. There will be a rebate for not only the equipment, but also the installation of the equipment in the home. And I won't go into too many details, but there's a couple different ways you can measure that savings using modeling software or measuring at the meter, and the target amount of savings that has to be reached varies depending on the approach. But overall, the goal is to do a whole home reduction, and we don't specify what has to be done in the home. It can be the envelope, it can be a heat pump, it can be a heat pump water heater. There's all kinds of things that come together to reach that savings goal. Then there's the electrification program, and that's really specifically about the specific appliances that are going to electrify and reduce use in the home. And the Inflation Reduction Act actually specifies the appliances that can be given for which a rebate can be given. There's about 8 of them that go from an induction stove, a heat pump water heater, but also the electrical panel, and the wiring in the home, or insulation, for example. So the states really have some flexibility of either offering all of them, or they can pick and choose which ones they will offer in those programs. Both programs have a focus on low and moderate income customers. For the whole home program, the rebate actually doubles for low income people who are at or below 80% of area median income. And on the electrification program, the whole program is only for low income, again, 80%, or moderate income, which are 150% of AMI. Excuse me a second. So some very specific call outs to support the low and moderate income households. And then on top of that, on the electrification side, there is a carve out from the $4.5 billion specifically for federally recognized tribes. And so there will be a special program version run just dedicating and allocating money for the tribes. So the way these programs work is that we issue the guidance for both of these programs, how to interpret the statute and the other requirements that the federal government has felt necessary for things like consumer protection and protection for low-income communities. And then the states are the ones who are actually going to run these programs. The funding is allocated to the states. They have to apply for it, but it's not a competitive application. Every state is allocated a certain amount of the funding. It is an important relationship that we are building together with these states. We want all these programs on the street and these rebates available as fast as possible. And we want to design great programs that take the learnings from what efficiency has been doing in the marketplace for years, and that can take a little time. So right now we've made a small portion of the funds available for states who want to use what we call the administrative funds, which is 5% of their overall funding allocation, to start doing planning and staffing up and hiring. And we're receiving applications for that right now. And then the next step will be their full program application. So, again, there's two programs that often are talked about together, but when it comes down to it, the states actually have to apply to each individual program with their design to meet the various specifications.
And I have some follow-up questions. One, do you anticipate that all 50 states will participate in the program, or have some declared or affirmed that they are not interested in participating?
We are very hopeful that all the states will participate. There is a moment later in 2024, in August, that the states have to let us know if they plan to apply. We have had engagement with pretty much every state and territory at this point. And we know that all of them are examining it and working really hard. And the funding that can be brought into these states has so much value, specifically for these low-income homeowners, to actually reduce their energy costs. It also is an investment in the workforce of a state. It's an advancement of the marketplace. So we're hopeful that all the states are going to run the programs, and we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. I do think this is if there is a moment to grow the market for these technologies, it is now. Some of the states have very low penetration rates for heat pumps or heat pump technologies. Mm-hmm. And if the government can help pare down the costs and really create a high levels of penetration to help that, to de-risk for the private sector to then go in and do even more, I think that's going to be such a huge impact for the market in general.
Agree. And it's just good to lower energy costs for consumers. I mean, there's all the climate goals, and it's a good economic engine in the state.
Absolutely. And we'll get to talking more about some of those other perhaps intertwining elements that can be paired with these programs in a minute. Yes. But I'd like to first understand sort of these upgrades can cost, tens of thousands of dollars in some cases. Some of these programs, for example, you get $8,000 maximum for a heat pump, et cetera. How do you anticipate that these rebates will offset the costs of the purchase and installation of the upgrades and appliances? Can people, for example, apply for multiple rebates over several different years? And is there a funding maximum that they can max out at? And much like I see, for example, the tax credits that are no longer limiting, do you see this as a multi-phase effort? Could they apply multiple years over for different upgrades and appliances based on the prerogatives and needs of the household?
So let me start with whether or how the rebates can fully or partially offset the costs. So the rebates are very generous, and yet we know they won't fully offset for many scenarios. Heat pumps can be more expensive. Installation of the heat pumps can be more expensive. Again, as I mentioned before, for whole home program, the rebate doubles for the low income household. But if it doesn't cover 100% of the costs, it is unlikely that a low-income homeowner or renter would be able to make up the difference. So we know there could be a gap on the whole home side. The way that the program is designed, to your question about applying multiple times, it is a single rebate amount to reach a 20% savings or 15% savings goal. And so reaching a 20% savings goal once, could they go back for more? It's possible, but finding 20% savings and then finding another 20% savings on top of that is unlikely. But what we do anticipate is that the two programs could be used together in a single home. So let's move over to the electrification program. There are the maximum rebate that's allowed for each appliance was set in the statute by Congress. And there's a maximum per house of $14,000 to combine the induction stove and the heat pump, or the panel, or however the package is put together. What we really think is that an opportunity, as an example, is that a state could use the whole home program to seal the home, make it as efficient as possible, and use all the funding for everything but the appliances inside, and then turn over to the electrification program, and then upgrade the appliances, which is a much smarter implementation of the appliances because the home has been made efficient before sizing the heat pump, for example. So we're strongly encouraging kind of looking at it in a multi-step way where possible. And then to the point of the rebates not fully perhaps covering the cost, we're strongly encouraging the states to look at other programs in their arsenal. There's a lot of states who are already running complementary or similar programs. And or there are some effective financing programs, low or no cost financing that can be offered. There's a revolving loan program that the DOE is running, a revolving loan fund that I've heard some states are considering using as part of that to make up that gap. There's a lot of different ways it can happen, and we're very aware of it and focusing on how to design the programs in a way to hopefully make it close to zero cost for especially the low-income homeowners and renters.
That's a very important point, is that there's other complementary and supplementary funding streams from the IRA, the infrastructure law. There are block grants available across a host of different programs. So I think that there's
utility programs out there. A lot of
local programs,
other state and local programs. I mean, the great news is there is a lot of money out there. The interesting challenge is to make sure you're careful how you put all the money together.
Absolutely.
Because we have some rules about you can't use two different programs to pay for the same piece of equipment, for example. So there's you can't use the two federal programs to pay for the same heat pump, for example. So there's some things that we have to be careful about when the funds are stacked together.
So if I understand it, you or the department would recommend or suggest that the homes program be used for making the home efficient, creating a sealed and tight envelope, and that the electrification program be more readily used for the purchase and installation of the appliances themselves.
That's one approach. I mean, every state is definitely taking into account what might already be running in their own states, but we do think that's a very logical way to maximize the rebates, especially for the low-income homes. Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So I started this conversation really setting the scene for how important I think these programs will be for the whole market and the movement and the advocacy community, and for everyone working to electrify our buildings and to improve home health. So for you, what about these programs makes them such a big game changer for U.S. building decarbonization, especially from an equity perspective?
Yeah, so let's start with the equity perspective. Carving out dollars just for low-income homeowners and renters is a game changer. And one thing that many people might not know is that, utilities have been running these programs for years, and the research has shown these homeowners are always underserved despite best efforts. And so it really is having that carve out. And what we did as DOE is we asked that a minimum of 50% of the rebates be spent, for low income or moderate income on the electrification side, and that 10% of that be targeted just at multifamily buildings. Because again, a traditionally underserved group of housing stock. And we've heard that some states they have the room to go all the way up to 100% of the rebates only to low and moderate income. And we've heard that some states are considering going in that direction. So that's kind of a game changer to start with. Next is the bill savings that are just a critical part of this program. I know we want to talk about electrification, and homeowners care about reducing their costs. And that's an important, Justice 40 goal, many things a part of the federal government. A third one that's a game changer is the workforce development opportunity. Paired with these two programs, a third program that was in the IRA is funding for every state to develop workforce contractors and training, specifically because we know these two programs are going to require trained electricians, home auditors. And so there's a third program that the states are applying for that's going to help with workforce development, which will hopefully pay off long after the programs have ended. And so, a lot of electric appliances will be installed. What's hard to contextualize is that $9 billion sounds like so much money, and yet it's a drop in the bucket in the number of homes that need to be treated. Our estimate is that maybe it could be as little as 1% of housing stock will be touched by this $9 billion across the US. So the success is the homes treated and the savings, but the bigger one that we're also looking at is market transformation. This program is creating new demand for retrofits and appliances. And to serve this demand, we need a lot of workers trained. We're going to need manufacturers and retailers to provide these goods. But the idea is that once everybody understands the benefits and the savings, and once the labor pool exists, these efficiency measures become the new normal. That this injection of a one-time over potentially 10 years, makes it that you come out the other side and it's a part of standard. Everybody asks of this in every home, not just the ones that we were able to touch.
Absolutely. If you can pare down the costs and make it a more readily accessible technology in every home, people are going to expect it as an option when they buy a new home or retrofit or renovate their living space.
Absolutely.
And when I heard that 1% metric, I thought, wow, that's not a lot. But then I think, well, that's a lot of people still in the United States. That's still
Absolutely. Yeah.
and it's all across the country. It's not just in one place. It's not localized to, progressive states like California or New York. This is going to touch every household in the country potentially who qualify. And I think that alone is the fact that it's a nationwide historic effort, I think is going to make a huge difference just on the education component. And I'm going to go there now thinking about the role and opportunity to really have a bold and ambitious marketing and messaging campaign, because so many of these technologies, people may have heard of them before. They may not even know they exist. And in some cases, in some states, it might even be illegal for them to fuel switch from a gas appliance to an electric appliance. They may not even be legally allowed to do that.
Yes.
So how are you all at the department working with state energy offices or third parties or advocacy agencies to really get the word out, to get people aware and excited about this opportunity?
It's an interesting messaging and marketing challenge, because back to the point about the 1% rough estimate of households that we touched, a mass marketing campaign might be misleading to just say, everybody come get your heat pump rebate, when in fact, these programs are going to be pretty targeted, especially with the income qualifications. So yes, we will absolutely have federal level broad messaging, but a lot of the really targeted messaging is going to come from the states, depending on how they design their programs. For example, I know of one particular state who's considering focusing all of their funds just on multifamily housing. If they go down that path, that messaging and marketing campaign is going to be very targeted to that specific audience. So it's a fine balance of, we want to do a lot of education. We want to make sure people understand the benefits, and the majority and the primary responsibility of the messaging is going to start with the states, and then the federal government will kind of layer on top and amplify where it makes sense, is how we're thinking about our messaging strategy right now.
That makes a lot of sense. And I also think that cities will get involved as well, because so much of building policy is local.
Yes.
Right? I think the cities will engage with their local actors, their municipalities, especially those that are more forward thinking, that have those more ambitious policies in place.
And also their community groups. It's well understood that, especially when you're trying to reach the lower income homeowners and renters, community groups are critical in the outreach and trust and engagement. So we'll be working with them as well.
You just mentioned the word renter, and I like to just put a pin in that and just come back to that. So it's not just homeowners. So this program applies to renters as well. Can you flesh that out a bit? How might that work?
Yeah, so we have some specific guidelines around renters in terms of engagement with your landlord, approval from your landlord, and then some protections for renters that once these appliances are put in the home, rent increases cannot happen that are directly tied to the savings that have resulted. So it's a large part of the housing stock, and we wanted to make these programs available to both, especially when multifamily building owners can then target their whole building, and that could be all renters to start with. So we wanted to look at all of the angles of residential home engagement and make sure that there's clear guidance and clear protection for all of the parties involved.
I think that's really important. I've always been a renter. I don't think I'll own a house in the District of Columbia anytime soon. So I'm thinking about, I have a gas stove. Maybe I want to, purchase a burner from a company, an induction burner. I don't know. Would that be applicable to someone like me?
Depending, again, the electrification program is for low and moderate income customers, as long as you qualify and your state program, that the DC metro area, the DC state program, that the DC program meets the qualifications, then absolutely. So, definitely look forward to seeing the DC program design come out, and you very well could be eligible.
That's wonderful. Hopefully more induction burners and renters apartments everywhere in America.
Wouldn't that be great?
So one thing we should talk about, I think people are curious, they want to know about the timeline.
Yeah.
So you mentioned it a little bit, but where are we in the process right now? What comes next? Sort of, I think average people want to know, when can they expect potentially to take advantage of these programs, and what will that application process be like for those end consumers?
Sure. So as I mentioned, where we are in the timeline right now is that the federal guidance came out to the states in July. And so the states are in their planning mode right now and preparing their applications. Many of them have received the administrative funding they requested because some of them needed resources to actually even prepare their applications, while other states are fairly well staffed in their state offices and are going straight down to their program design. So the steps from there is they're going to submit us an application. We approve it, hopefully fairly quickly. It's a pretty complex application, so it's going to take us a little bit of time to approve it. All that being said, we expect programs to start hitting the streets beginning in, call it maybe Q2 next year, spring, late winter, spring, starting with some of the more, advanced states, and then continue to roll out throughout 2024 and maybe even some a little bit into 2025. This is how we're looking at kind of the distribution of the states. And I will tell you, we're getting a lot of questions about, why is this taking so long and how can a consumer get to it? We're building the capacity. We want to make sure that part of the reason why our requirements took some time is that it's really important we protect consumers in this process. There's great people out in the workplace, but every once in a while there's a contractor or a agency who's going to try and take advantage of this program in a way that's not appropriate, and we need to make sure we're putting in the right protections, and the states are putting in the right protections for that, and some of that takes a little time. Ultimately, each state is going to have their own website, their own application process for how a homeowner or renter will apply. And so, and especially on the electrification side, they're going to be able to walk into a Home Depot or a Lowe's and bring in a coupon from the state website and receive that rebate right at point of sale. So it's going to be a great experience, and there's a lot of implementers out there who have a lot of experience that the states will be working with. So I expect there to be really robust websites and mobile apps and ways for average consumers to engage once we get through this application process with the states and they start rolling out in early 2024.
Right. So next year, say June, some states will have funding available.
I would say hopefully sooner than that.
Sooner than that. Okay.
Hopefully sooner than that. Not for all states, but hopefully for a few.
And we're expecting maybe like a multimodal application approach, maybe paper, websites, online.
All up to the states, but experience shows that for this diverse audience, yes, you need to make sure you're reaching all of your audience. And again, the people they're likely to be hiring to help them with the kind of consumer-facing side have a lot of experience with these kind of programs and making sure that they're accessible.
That's wonderful. I hope they're also hiring translators for multilingual demographics.
That's a great point.
Who is a linguist.
That's a great point. Thank you for raising it. Yes.
So I think we have a few minutes left, but I want to come back to some points here you made, and we can just focus in on them. Thinking about the stacking of incentives. Now, you mentioned that no two federal grants can go to the same appliance in the same home.
Correct.
But for example, you may not have all the answers now, but I'm curious what you think about this. So for one appliance in a home, could you apply funding from different utility and local grants in a state program and tax incentives? How could all of those funding streams work in concert with the funding they might get from your program?
Yes, to all of those things. So it could be that there's a utility program in your area and you use that for some part of your home. You use our program for another part. That is the smartest way to do it. But there's and then the tax credit, although we know that a lot of the low income homeowners won't necessarily be able to access the tax credit. But there's going to be a lot of creative solutions out there, and we're strongly encouraging it. And states, almost all the states, are looking at it in some way of how to pair with existing programs, because it's going to help make the dollars go further. And so it's going to require a lot of communication, though, to help the average homeowner or renter understand what they need to do. And so this is going to be a big part of our focus, is just helping to make sure the braiding, what we call program braiding or stacking, is follows our guidance, but then also is amplified so that people know how to make sure they can maximize it.
Thank you so much. So it seems like a lot of opportunity to really combine and mix and match from different opportunities.
Most definitely.
Just one more question on that, just before we have to wrap up into our final question here. Just so I understand, could those different money streams be used for the same appliance in the same home, or is that still to be determined by the states?
That's to be determined by the states. It definitely depends on how they design their guidelines.
Gotcha. Okay, great to hear. But the opportunity exists for that to happen in some form.
It does in some form, yeah. I mean, especially for the example we talked about before, where the federal rebate doesn't quite cover the whole cost. You know, how can a state program perhaps make up the difference?
Gotcha. Okay, great to hear. So my question for you is, what does success look like for you in this program? So they've run their course, they're out in the world. Where do we see our country now in our building decarbonization scorecard over the next 5, maybe 10 years? What is the impact of our program?
It's a great question. First and foremost, I expect a lot of low and moderate homeowners and renters who were previously unable to access these needed upgrades to their homes for their own health and safety, as well as energy cost management, to be able to do so thanks to this program. So to me, that is a huge success point. And they'll feel the impact of energy efficiency in their lives. I think a lot of people can't feel and touch energy efficiency sometimes, yet it's so valuable. In terms of the decarbonization scorecard, while we will have added so many more homes to the march toward electrification, right? The bigger impact will hopefully be, yes, we'll add a lot of homes. And we've talked about there's a lot more homes to go from there. So the biggest impact is hopefully the improvements to the industry that were driven by this investment that will allow it to be more scalable and accessible and available to even more homeowners and renters long into the future after the funds have been disbursed. So it's the legacy that hopefully, the program will leave, because it's well designed and well communicated, and real homeowners and renters, everyday homeowners, feel that impact. And that's what I'd like to see. And that I will be happy to claim success at that point.
The legacy component is really interesting, because it will maybe the first time some of these people have ever heard of these technologies, first time they've engaged with contractors in this way. And they could see some great bill savings and home health improvements. So I think that alone is a huge win for our country and for equity.
Yes.
And for market transformation, like you mentioned earlier, 1% seems like not a lot, but it can make a huge change in bringing the private sector in and in growing the interest and demand for these technologies. So hats off to all of you at the DOE for working really hard to make this program a reality. And we look forward to seeing how it rolls out.
Thanks, me too.
Yeah. Well, it's been so great talking to you. Thank you so much for being here today. It's unfortunately all the time we have on Buildings Hub Live. I really want to say thank you so much for Karen for being here today and for providing her expertise and her insight to everyone here in our live audience who participated in our discussion today. Should you wish to watch this episode again or share it with your friends or your colleagues, you can find us on the Atlas YouTube page, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. We encourage you to check out our Buildings Hub platform, our new data story, and join our electrification community today. We hope to catch you on the next episode of Buildings Hub Live. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buildings Hub Live. You can listen to this episode and all other installments in our podcast on the Atlas YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you're interested in additional content, check out our data, articles, and dashboards on Buildings Hub at atlasbuildingshub.com. Thanks for joining, and catch you next time.